Hi, welcome to Quiet Law YouTube channel. There is something deeply comforting about the unknown. Not the sharp, anxious kind of unknown that keeps you wide awake staring at the ceiling, but the soft, ancient kind. The kind that drifts in like fog over still water, carrying with it the faint scent of old stone and quiet forests and civilizations that once looked up at the same stars you see tonight. This is that kind of unknown. Somewhere in the world right now, in a museum drawer or a university archive or a forgotten hillside, there are messages that no one alive can read. Words, or something very much like words, pressed into clay and carved into rock by hands that moved with purpose and intention thousands of years ago. People who had something to say. People who believed, perhaps, that someone would eventually understand them. We have not understood them. Not yet. And there is something beautiful in that, if you let yourself sit with it. Because it means the story is not finished. It means the world is still full of doors we have not yet opened, corridors we have not yet walked, and libraries whose books we cannot yet read. So settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day dissolve, just gently, just a little. Tonight, we are going to wander together through some of the quietest and most extraordinary mysteries our species has left behind. There is no rush. There is nowhere else to be. Only here, only this, only the soft unfolding of things very old and very wonderful. We begin, as perhaps all stories of human thought must begin, with the first attempts to make meaning visible. Long before the great writing systems of Egypt or Mesopotamia were etched into history, long before anyone had yet agreed on what a letter was or what a sentence ought to look like, people were pressing marks into clay and tracing shapes onto stone with a seriousness that suggests they knew exactly what they were doing. Whether we can follow their thinking is another matter entirely. In northern Greece, near the shores of a lake called Orestioda, there is a small wooden tablet that was pulled from the water in 1993 during an archaeological excavation of an ancient lakeside settlement. The Dispilio tablet, as it came to be known, is modest in appearance. It is roughly the size of your hand, darkened with age, covered in a series of markings that researchers have struggled ever since to interpret. What makes it so quietly astonishing is its age. The settlement around it has been dated to somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 years before the Common Era, which places this little carved tablet among the oldest known examples of written or proto-written symbols ever discovered. Whether the markings represent a true writing system, a kind of accounting, a ritual notation, or something else entirely, no one can say with confidence. But someone made those marks deliberately, pressing each one into soft clay with care. They had a reason. We simply do not know what it was. Not far away, at least in the broad geography of prehistory, a set of 3 small clay tablets were discovered in Romania in the 1960s, near a village called Tartaria. The Tartaria tablets are similarly ancient, similarly puzzling, and covered in symbols that bear a striking and somewhat unsettling resemblance to early Sumerian pictographs from Mesopotamia, thousands of miles to the east. Some researchers have taken this resemblance as evidence of a shared symbolic tradition stretching across a vast ancient world. Others suggest independent invention, the idea that when humans begin reaching for ways to record thought, they sometimes reach in similar directions. Neither explanation fully satisfies, and the tablets sit in their display case in Cluj, quiet and patient, keeping whatever secret they hold. Across the world, in China, another set of ancient mark surfaces from the deep past. The Bampo symbols, discovered at a Neolithic site near the modern city of Xi'an, and dated to roughly 5,000 years before the present, are a collection of simple geometric signs painted onto pottery. There are over 100 distinct symbols. Some researchers believe they represent an early form of writing or a system of ownership marks. Others see them as decorative. What is striking is that some of these symbols bear a resemblance to later Chinese characters, which raises a quiet and tantalizing question about just how far back the roots of written language actually reach, and what may have been lost in the long centuries between. From France, in the small town of Glosel, comes a stranger story still. In 1924, a young farmer named Emile Freyden was ploughing a field when the ground gave way beneath him, and he found himself looking into a chamber filled with ancient objects including clay tablets covered in inscriptions unlike anything previously catalogued. The glossal tablets provoked one of the most heated controversies in the history of archaeology. Some experts declared them genuine, potentially representing one of the earliest writing systems in the world. Others accused Freyden of elaborate forgery. Decades of argument followed. More recent thermoluminescence testing has suggested that many of the objects are genuinely old, though the debate has never been entirely settled. The tablets remain in a small local museum in Glosal, overlooked by most of the world, which somehow seems to suit them. Of all the undeciphered scripts humanity has yet encountered, perhaps none carries quite the same sense of elegant mystery as the Phaistos disc. Discovered in 1908 in the ruins of a Minoan palace on the island of Crete, the disc is a fired clay circle about 15 centimeters across, and both of its faces are covered in a spiral arrangement of stamped symbols, pressed into the clay using individual seals before it was baked hard. There are 45 distinct signs and 241 total impressions. No other object using these symbols has ever been found anywhere in the world. Dozens of scholars have proposed translations and interpretations over the past century. None has achieved consensus. The disc sits in the Heraklion Museum, beautiful and sealed, a message to no one and everyone at once. Half a world away, on Easter Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a script called Rongo Rongo was being inscribed onto wooden tablets long before European contact. It is one of only a handful of writing systems believed to have been invented independently, without influence from any other tradition. And yet when missionaries arrived on the island in the 19th century, they discouraged the practice, and within a generation, almost everyone who could read Rongo Rongo was gone. Only around 24 tablets survive, scattered across museums on several continents. The knowledge of how to read them did not survive with them. The people of Easter Island are left with an inheritance they cannot open. In the highlands of Australia, the Kurumba stones present yet another layer of ancient inscription that science has yet to fully examine or explain, believed by some researchers to carry symbolic meaning consistent with very early human communication systems. Meanwhile, in the Ningxia region of northwestern China, the Demadi petroglyphs, some of the most extensive rock carvings in Asia, cover cliff faces with thousands of figures and symbols estimated to be at least 10,000 years old. And in the alpine valleys of northern Italy, the Val Camonica engravings represent one of Europe's largest collections of prehistoric rock art, with over 200,000 carved figures spanning thousands of years of continuous human expression. All of these marks, pressed and carved and etched across thousands of years and thousands of miles, speak to something fundamental about us. The need to say something, the hope that it will last, the quiet faith that someone somewhere, sometime, will be listening. Let that thought settle over you now like something warm and soft. All across this ancient world, people were reaching outward, trying to be understood. And here you are, thousands of years later, still listening. There is something almost tender about the way ancient people looked at the sky. Not with instruments or equations, at least not the kind we would recognize, but with a quality of attention that we have perhaps lost touch with in our bright, busy modern world. They watched. They waited. They noticed patterns with a patience that stretches the imagination, and then they did something remarkable. They wrote those patterns down, not always in words, but in stone and line and map and monument, leaving behind a record of understanding that we are still, in many ways, catching up to. Consider for a moment what it means to make a map. It means you have looked at the world from above in your mind, that you have abstracted the curve of a coastline or the bend of a river into something representable, something portable, something that can travel further than you can. It is an act of extraordinary intellectual ambition, and human beings were doing it far earlier than we once believed. In 1513, a Turkish admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis completed a map of the world. It was drawn on gazelle skin, colored in careful detail, and it depicted the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with a degree of accuracy that was, for its time, frankly startling. But it is not the accuracy of the familiar coastlines that has occupied researchers for generations. It is the presence of what appears to be a southern landmass, stretching along the bottom of the map in a configuration that bears a troubling resemblance to Antarctica. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, more than 300 years after Piri Reis completed his work. The admiral himself noted in his annotations that he drew upon older source maps, charts compiled from sources he no longer had access to in full. Where those source maps came from, and who made them, and when, remains one of cartography's most quietly persistent questions. The map itself is held in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul, and it has not yet given up everything it knows. From the precision of ancient cartography, we drift southward and eastward, to the shores of Lake Turkana in northern Kenya, where a group of basalt pillars stand in careful arrangement on a flat plain. The Namaratunga stones, 19 in total, were erected roughly 300 years before the Common Era by people of the Cushitic culture, and for a long time they were assumed to be burial markers, little more. Then, in the 1970s, an archaeologist named B.N. Lynch began studying their alignment and found something unexpected. The pillars appear to be oriented towards specific star systems, including Triangulum, the Pleiades, Bellatrix, and several others, in a configuration that corresponds to a sophisticated African calendar system, still used by the Cushitic peoples today. Here, on a plain in Kenya, someone had built an observatory from stone, a way of anchoring the sky to the ground, of making the passage of time visible and fixed. They understood the stars well enough to encode them in the landscape itself. That same impulse, to press meaning into the earth on a scale large enough to last, appears in one of South America's most enduring visual mysteries. On the southern coast of Peru, on a sandy promontory overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a figure known as the Parocus candelabra has been etched into a hillside to a depth of about 60 centimeters, standing nearly 200 meters tall. It has been there for at least 2,000 years, possibly longer. It is visible from miles out at sea, and some researchers believe it served as a navigational marker for ancient sailors. Others connect it to the Parocus culture, to astronomical alignments, to ceremonial significance. What is certain is that it was made with intention, and that whoever made it understood something about visibility, about permanence, and about the relationship between the land and those who travel across it. Moving inland from the coast, the desert plateau of Nazca unfolds in austere silence. The Nazca lines are among the most discussed and least resolved archaeological puzzles on the planet. Hundreds of geoglyphs, some of them simple straight lines running for miles without deviation, others depicting animals and plants and geometric forms visible only from the air, were created by the Nazca culture between roughly 500 before the Common Era and 500 of the Common Era. The hummingbird, the condor, the spider, the monkey with its curling tail. They lie spread across the pale desert as if waiting to be seen from above, which raises the question, of course, of whether they ever were. Theories range from the astronomical to the ritualistic, from water mapping to ceremonial walkways. No single explanation has satisfied everyone, and the lines themselves remain magnificently indifferent to our attempts to explain them. Just to the north of Nazca, the Palpa lines present a related but distinct set of mysteries. While the Nazca lines were the creation of a single culture over a relatively defined period, the Palpa lines appear to have been made by multiple cultures across a much longer span of time, including the earlier Parocus culture, whose candelabra watches over the coast. Some of the Palpa figures are older, some are layered over each other, some appear to have been deliberately modified or erased. They suggest not a single moment of creation, but an ongoing conversation with the landscape, a kind of dialogue stretching across generations and centuries, each group adding its voice to a record that no one person planned or oversaw. And perhaps that is the thought to carry with you as we turn the page. All of this, the maps and the stones, the lines and the pillars, represents not just knowledge but the desire to share it. To say, here is what we have learned about the world, here is what the sky looks like from this place, here is the shape of the land as we understand it. The message travels across millennia and reaches you here, tonight, in the quiet. Let that quiet deepen now. Let the stars feel a little closer than usual. There are moments in archaeology when something surfaces from the ground, and the scientists who examine it go very still. Not from fear exactly, but from a particular quality of surprise, the kind that makes you set down your tools and look again, and then look a third time, because what you are holding does not quite fit the story you thought you knew. This is not a comfortable feeling for a scientist. Anomalies are inconvenient. They require revision, rethinking, sometimes the dismantling of frameworks that have taken decades to build. And yet the anomalies keep appearing, patient and unhurried, waiting for the understanding to catch up with the evidence. There is a cup in the British Museum that most visitors walk past without a second glance. It is Roman, dating to roughly the 4th century of the Common Era, and it depicts the mythological figure of King Lycurgus being consumed by vines. It is beautiful in the ordinary way of ancient craftsmanship. But the Lycurgus cup has a secret that was not discovered until the 20th century. When illuminated from the front, the cup appears jade green. When light shines through it from behind, it glows a deep, wine-dark red. This phenomenon is caused by the presence of nanoparticles, gold and silver particles ground to a size of roughly 50 nanometers, distributed through the glass with a precision that modern researchers have described as remarkable even by contemporary standards. Nanotechnology, as a formal scientific discipline, emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. The Romans appear to have been doing something functionally equivalent 1700 years earlier, and whether by accident or by a sophisticated understanding of materials that has since been entirely lost, we cannot yet say. Across the ancient world, in the courtyard of the Quat ul-Islam Mosque in Delhi, stands a pillar of iron that has been there for over 1600 years. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, erected during the reign of Chandragupta II, in roughly the 4th or 5th century of the Common Era, stands nearly 7.5 meters tall and weighs over 6 tons. What makes it extraordinary is not its size, but its condition. After 16 centuries of exposure to rain, heat, and the open air, it has barely rusted. Modern metallurgists who have studied the pillar have found that it was forged using a process that created a thin, but highly stable layer of a compound called mica-white on its surface, a form of iron hydrogen phosphate that acts as a near-perfect barrier against corrosion. Replicating this level of corrosion resistance using modern techniques is entirely achievable, but understanding how craftsmen in 4th century India achieved it with the tools and knowledge available to them remains an open and genuinely fascinating question. From India we travel to modern-day Iraq, to the region that was once ancient Mesopotamia, where in 1938 an archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was working in the basement storage rooms of the Baghdad Museum when he came across a small clay jar that had been excavated near the village of Kujut Robu. Inside the jar was a copper cylinder, and inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod, and the whole assembly was sealed with asphalt. Koenig examined it carefully, and then made a proposal that was met with considerable skepticism. He suggested that the object, which has come to be known as the Baghdad Battery, was an ancient galvanic cell, a device capable of generating a small electrical current when filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar or grape juice. Subsequent experiments with reconstructed versions of the device have confirmed that it does indeed produce electricity under those conditions. Whether it was ever actually used for this purpose, and if so what for, remains disputed. But the design works. It works, and it is 2,000 years old. The ancient Egyptians, great builders and great recorders of knowledge, left behind at the Temple of Hathor at Dendera a series of wall carvings that have provoked considerable debate since the 19th century. The Dendera reliefs show elongated, bulb-like forms with a figure inside that some researchers have interpreted as a depiction of electrical discharge within a glass vessel, something resembling what we would today call a Crookes tube or an early form of electric lamp. Egyptologists have largely argued for symbolic or religious interpretations, seeing the forms as lotus flowers or mythological imagery. Others, particularly those with backgrounds in electrical engineering, find the resemblance to discharge phenomena difficult to dismiss entirely. The carvings sit in their temple, carved in stone, that will long outlast the argument. In the ancient cities of southern Arabia, the Sabaean inscriptions, left by the civilization that once flourished in what is now Yemen, reveal a level of astronomical, agricultural, and architectural knowledge that continues to impress researchers who study the region. And in the temples and structures of ancient India, the Lakshmana temple complex at Khajuraho contains a helical architectural element, a form of twisted, spiraling structural design whose sophistication as an engineering solution has been noted by modern structural analysts studying the site. The knowledge embedded in these structures is quiet and undemonstrative. It does not announce itself. It simply endures. There is a kind of knowledge that does not need to be explained to be real. It lives in the thing itself, in the object that does not rust, in the cup that changes color, in the pillar that has outlasted every empire that ever claimed the land it stands on. The knowledge is in the making, and the making has lasted. Rest now with that thought. The world is very old and very full, and you have barely scratched the surface, which means there is always something wonderful left to discover. There are ideas that arrive too early, thoughts that surface in one age and are not understood until another, like seeds carried by wind to soil that is not yet ready for them. Sometimes those ideas leave traces behind, small and ambiguous and endlessly debated, and we find them centuries or millennia later and stand before them with that particular mixture of wonder and uncertainty that is, perhaps, one of the most distinctly human feelings there is. The ancient Egyptians were extraordinary observers. They watched the natural world with a quality of attention that expressed itself in art and architecture and medicine and ritual, and occasionally in objects that do not fit neatly into any of our existing categories. In 1898, a small wooden carving was found in a tomb at Saqqara, the vast necropolis south of Cairo that had already yielded so many of antiquity's secrets. The object was catalogued, stored, and largely forgotten until 1969, when an Egyptologist named Dr. Khalil Messeher was reviewing a collection in the Cairo Museum and picked it up for a closer look. What he was holding was a small bird-shaped object, palm-sized and smooth, carved from sycamore wood and dated to roughly 200 years before the Common Era. And what struck Messeher, who had a background in aviation as well as archaeology, was its shape. The wings were not curved downward in the manner of most Egyptian bird carvings, which typically depict birds in a natural resting pose. They were flat and slightly swept back. The tail was vertical rather than horizontal, and the aerodynamic proportions of the whole object were, he argued, more consistent with a glider or a flying model than with a decorative bird. When replicas were built and tested, they demonstrated genuine lift. The Saqqara bird, as it came to be called, has been the subject of debate ever since, with some researchers seeing a sophisticated aerodynamic experiment, and others seeing a ceremonial object whose flight-like properties are coincidental. The original sits in Cairo, and the question sits with it. The Saqqara bird does not stand entirely alone in this particular territory of mystery. Across the Atlantic, in the tombs and offerings of the Quimbeya people of pre-Columbian Colombia, a collection of small gold objects was found that has generated a strikingly similar conversation. The Quimbeya artifacts, a group of gold figurines created roughly between 500 and 800 of the Common Era, have traditionally been interpreted as stylized depictions of birds, insects, or fish, which is a perfectly reasonable interpretation. But a subset of them, with their delta-shaped wings, raised tail fins, and absence of obvious biological features like feathers or eyes, have attracted the attention of researchers who see in them something closer to an aerodynamic form than a natural creature. In the 1990s, two German aeronautical engineers built scaled-up versions of several of the figurines and tested them in wind tunnels and with model aircraft engines. They flew. Whether their makers intended them to represent flying machines, or whether the aerodynamic qualities are incidental to a purely artistic tradition, no one can say with certainty, but the objects are real, the flight tests were real, and the question lingers warmly in the air between the known and the imagined. From the tangible we drift toward the textual, as we must when we enter the territory of ancient Indian literature, where the boundary between metaphor and instruction has always been a permeable and interesting one. The Prajapati tablets, a body of ancient inscriptions connected to the broader tradition of Vedic and Sanskrit knowledge, have attracted the attention of researchers interested in the technical dimensions of ancient Indian thought, a tradition that produced, among other things, the Vaimanika Shastra, a text purporting to describe the construction and operation of aerial vehicles. Whether these texts represent genuine technical knowledge, visionary or spiritual allegory, or something that defies both categories is a question that scholars across disciplines continue to approach from different directions. What they share is a consistent and detailed interest in the mechanics of flight at a time when the dominant historical narrative holds that such concepts were not yet available to human thinking. The tradition is vast and complex, and rewards a very long kind of patience. And then there is the Lamanar tablet, found in Ecuador and part of a collection of unusual stone objects discovered in a cave system in the region. Among these objects, a flat dark stone bears what some researchers have described as a map or diagram carved into its surface, alongside symbols that have been interpreted by various analysts as having connections to ancient scripts from other parts of the world. The object and the collection it belongs to are contested in their authenticity and their interpretation, as many such discoveries inevitably are. But they are strange, and they are interesting, and they sit in that honest and humbling space where we must acknowledge that the full picture of what ancient human beings knew and imagined and attempted is not yet fully assembled. Perhaps it never will be, not entirely. Perhaps that is part of the gift of history, that it remains open at the edges, that there is always one more cave to explore, one more storage room to re-examine, one more wooden bird to pick up and hold to the light. The sky has always fascinated us. Long before we had the machinery to reach it, we were dreaming our way upward, carving our dreams in wood and gold and stone. Dream with that now. Let your thoughts lift gently, unhurried, upward and away. Every so often, the earth gives back something it should not have. Something that arrives from the deep past, without an acceptable explanation, without a proper context, without any reasonable account of how it came to be where it was found. These are the objects that quietly dismantle certainty, not with drama or fanfare, but with the simple, stubborn fact of their existence. In 1844, a block of sandstone was being quarried near the town of Mulgai in Scotland, and embedded within it, in rock that geologists dated to the Cretaceous period, roughly 100 million years old, was a small, apparently manufactured object. A nail, or something very much like a nail, an inch long, with a head, partially encased in the rock itself, as though it had been there since the stone was formed. The Kingudi artifact, as it is now known, passed through several hands and generated considerable discussion before eventually fading from mainstream attention, as such things tend to do. What it was and how it got there has never been satisfactorily explained. Not far from the Kingudi artifact in terms of the questions it raises, though very far in terms of geography, the London hammer was found in 1936 near the town of London in Texas, USA, by a couple named Max and Emma Hahn, who noticed a piece of wood protruding from a rock outcrop near Red Creek. When the rock was broken open, it contained a hammer, a metal-headed hammer with a wooden handle, embedded in a concretion of ancient rock. The rock encasing it has been variously dated by different researchers, and the methods involved have been disputed, but the hammer itself, when analyzed, revealed an iron composition of unusual purity, with a small percentage of chlorine that modern metallurgy struggles to replicate. It sits now in a private museum in Texas, still in its rock, still raising questions that no one has fully answered. From Texas to the Mojave Desert of California, where in 1961 three rockhounds named Wallace, Wally, and Mike Micasell were collecting geodes in the hills near Olancha when they found a rock that, when cut open, revealed something entirely unexpected at its center. A ceramic cylinder surrounding a bright metal core, with a hexagonal copper collar at one end, the whole assembly bearing a striking resemblance to a modern spark plug. The rock around it was estimated by a geologist to be at least 500,000 years old. The object became known as the Koso artifact, and it provoked immediate and enthusiastic speculation about out-of-place objects and ancient technology, speculation that has never entirely cooled despite subsequent analyses, suggesting that the object is more likely a 1920s-era champion spark plug encased in a hardite concretion, a process that can occur far more quickly than most people expect. Even in its more mundane explanation, the Koso artifact teaches something interesting, that the Earth can make things look ancient very quickly, which in turn makes us wonder what else might be hiding in plain sight. And then there is the Iod object, found in 1974 near the town of Iod in Romania, in a dig site alongside mastodon bones estimated to be roughly 11,000 years old. The object itself is a wedge-shaped block of metal, roughly the size of a human hand, with two cylindrical holes and an overall form that is frequently described as resembling the head of a hammer or a complex mechanical fitting. When analyzed, it was found to be composed primarily of aluminium, with over a dozen other elements included in the alloy. Aluminium, in its refined metallic form, was not produced by humans until the 19th century. The official response to this discrepancy has generally been that the object is a modern intrusion into the soil, which is a reasonable position, though it has not entirely satisfied those who have studied its context. The eyed object is one of those cases where the evidence is genuinely ambiguous, where honest assessment requires sitting with a question that does not resolve into either a comfortable confirmation or a clean dismissal. These objects share something important. They are not asking us to abandon reason. They are asking us to apply it fully, without the shortcuts that come from deciding in advance what is and is not possible. The universe is old. The Earth is old. Human ingenuity is old. And the intersection of those three enormities has not yet been fully mapped. Rest in that unmapped space for a while. It is a comfortable place, once you get used to it. History, as it is usually taught, has a shape. It begins with simple things and moves, in a more or less orderly fashion, toward complex things. Stone tools, then bronze, then iron, then writing, then cities, then everything else in roughly the order we expect. It is a reassuring shape. It suggests progress, direction, a story with a legible arc. But the evidence, when you look at it closely and with honest eyes, does not always agree to hold that shape. Sometimes something surfaces that belongs to the wrong chapter entirely, and the story has to breathe a little, expand a little, make room for a more complicated truth. In the 1970s, a site along the Savannah River in South Carolina was being excavated by archaeologist Albert Goodyear, and what he eventually found in the deeper layers of the topper site, beneath the established Clovis cultural horizon that was once considered the baseline for human presence in the Americas, were chert flakes, small stone tools, chipped in ways consistent with deliberate human manufacture. The layer they were found in was dated to at least 50,000 years before the present, some analyses pushing the estimate even earlier. If accurate, this places human beings in North America tens of thousands of years before the accepted timeline of the first Americans, who were thought to have crossed from Asia roughly 15,000 years ago. The interpretation remains disputed, with some researchers arguing the flakes are naturally formed rather than manufactured. But Goodyear has continued excavating, and the layers keep going down. In central Mexico, near the town of Valsequillo, a site known as Huitlaco was excavated in the 1960s and 1970s by archaeologist Cynthia Owen Williams. What her team found were sophisticated stone tools, including bifacial and projectile point tools of a type associated with quite advanced human cultures, embedded in geological strata that geologist Virginia Steen McIntyre subsequently dated using 4 independent methods to approximately 250,000 years before the present. The implications were so far outside accepted understanding that Steen McIntyre's findings were initially rejected, and her career was significantly affected by the controversy. The site has never been fully reinvestigated with modern methods. It sits in Mexico, covered over, waiting for the scientific courage to take it seriously again. Sometimes it is not a tool, but a coin that arrives out of order. In 1954, a small silver penny was found at a Native American site called Goddard, near the coast of Maine, during an excavation of a Penobscot culture midden. The penny was initially overlooked and misidentified, but when eventually examined by specialists, it was confirmed to be a genuine Norse coin, minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre, between roughly 1065 and 1093 of the Common Era. It is the only Norse coin ever found at a Native American archaeological site in North America. It suggests contact, trade, or movement of objects through networks we do not fully understand between the Norse world and the indigenous peoples of the American Northeast, at least 4 centuries before Columbus. The main penny sits in the Maine State Museum, small and silver, and quietly significant. From the coast of Maine we travel to the shores of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, where a large stone bowl, known as the Fuente Magna Bowl, was reportedly found in the early 20th century, near the ancient site of Tiwanaku. The bowl is carved with a series of inscriptions that researchers, including Clyde Winters, have interpreted as Proto-Sumerian writing, a script associated with the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia thousands of miles away. If the identification is correct, and it remains heavily debated, it would imply a connection between the ancient Near East and pre-Columbian South America that mainstream archaeology does not currently accommodate. The bowl is held in a museum in La Paz, where it has attracted considerable attention from researchers working at the edges of accepted historical understanding. And finally, In a collection of artifacts from central Mexico, among objects recovered from a burial at a site near Texcoco, there is a small terracotta head that was for many years stored without particular attention before being recognized as something unusual. The Tecáxicalix head is a small Roman-style figurine, identified by art historians as depicting a Roman or possibly Mediterranean individual, and dated by the context of its burial to the pre-Columbian period, before European contact. How a Roman-style figurine arrived in a sealed pre-Columbian burial in Mexico is a question that archaeology has not yet answered to general satisfaction, though hypotheses range from pre-Columbian transoceanic contact to accidental transport via ocean currents to post-conquest planting. What is certain is that it is old, that it is there, and that it does not fit. Perhaps that is the truest thing we can say about so many of these discoveries. They do not fit, and their not fitting is important, because a picture that only contains the pieces that fit is not a complete picture. It is a comfortable one, but not a complete one. Let comfort and incompleteness sit together in you now, easy and soft. The world is bigger than any story we have yet told about it. And somewhere out there, another piece is waiting to be found. There is a particular kind of strangeness that lives in the human face. We are, as a species, extraordinarily sensitive to faces. We see them in clouds and wood grain and the patterns of shadows on a wall. We recognize them across vast distances and in the briefest glances. And so when ancient peoples chose to make faces, to model them in clay or carve them from stone, they were engaging in something deeply primal, an act of recognition, of naming, of saying this is a being, this is a presence, this matters. But sometimes the faces they made were not quite like any face we know. And that is where things become very interesting indeed. In the marshlands of southern Iraq, in the region once occupied by the ancient Ubaid culture roughly 7,000 years ago, archaeologists have recovered a series of small clay figurines that have given researchers cause to stop and look twice. The Ubaid lizardmen statues are humanoid in form, but distinctly non-human in their features. They have elongated, reptilian heads, slanted eyes, and in some cases appear to hold infants of similar appearance. Some figures are clearly female, some appear to be engaged in daily activities, and they are rendered with a consistency across multiple sites, and across what appears to be an extended period of time, which suggests they were not accidental or casual creations. Whether they depict gods, mythological beings, shamanic transformations, an actual remembered encounter with something unusual, or a symbolic vocabulary we simply no longer possess the key to, they remain one of the oldest and most visually arresting mysteries in the archaeological record. From the ancient Middle East, we travel to the Sichuan Basin of southwestern China, where in 1929 a farmer digging near the town of Sanxingdui uncovered a cache of extraordinary bronze and jade objects. Decades later, in 1986, two large sacrificial pits were found nearby containing thousands of artifacts from a Bronze Age culture that had been entirely unknown to history. The Sanxingdui masks are among the most visually striking objects produced by any ancient culture anywhere in the world. Cast in bronze, the largest of them over a meter wide, they feature enormous protruding eyes, some of them cylindrical and extending outward by nearly 17 centimeters, wide ears, and a scale that feels more architectural than personal. Who made them, and for what purpose, and why they were buried in sacrificial pits, and what relationship this culture had to the other civilizations of ancient China, are questions that the artifacts themselves have not yet answered. The culture that produced them appears to have arisen and vanished without leaving textual records, and the masks stare outward from their display cases with an expression that is impossible to read and impossible to forget. Across the Pacific in Guatemala, the Monte Alto heads present yet another tradition of monumental portraiture from the ancient world. These large stone sculptures, created by a pre-Olmec culture and dating to roughly 1800 before the Common Era, or possibly earlier, depict rounded, heavily lidded faces with closed eyes and an expression that has been described variously as serene, sleeping, or in a state of trance. Several of them are magnetic, with specific points on their stone surfaces demonstrating measurable magnetic properties, a feature that seems almost impossible to attribute to accident, and that has never been fully explained. Whether the magnetic properties were known to their makers and considered significant, or whether they are an unrelated quirk of the stone, we cannot say. But the sculptors knew stone. They knew weight and permanence. And they made faces that were meant, without any doubt, to endure. In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, deep within the Lolton cave system, which stretches for several kilometers beneath the limestone landscape, and was used by human beings from the Pleistocene era onward, a series of carved figures on the cave walls depict forms and faces that researchers have connected to the long tradition of sacred cave use in Mesoamerican culture. The Lolton cave figures, painted and carved across what appears to be thousands of years of continuous ritual use, represent one of the longest unbroken records of human spiritual activity in the Americas. The cave was a place where the boundary between the surface world and the underworld was considered permeable, where ceremonies were conducted in darkness, where the act of marking the walls was itself a form of communication with forces larger than the individual. Standing in Lolton today, in the echoing dark, it is not difficult to understand why. From Mexico to the highlands of Guanajuato, where in the mid-20th century a German physician and collector named Julsrud began accumulating an enormous collection of clay figurines recovered from the base of a hill near the town of Acambaro. The Acambaro figurines now number in the tens of thousands, and they depict, among many other things, what appear to be dinosaurs. Not the fanciful creatures of folklore, but anatomically specific depictions of creatures that bear detailed resemblances to Stegosaurus, Brachiosaurus, pterodactyl, and others. The figurines are dismissed by mainstream archaeology as a modern fabrication or elaborate hoax. Others have argued with equal conviction for their genuineness, pointing to thermoluminescence dating results and the sheer impracticality of manufacturing and burying tens of thousands of individual figurines as evidence of authenticity. The collection sits in Acambaro, enormous and unresolved, demanding more attention than it has yet received. In the Ica region of Peru, a physician named Javier Cabrera began collecting engraved stones in the 1960s that had been known to local people for generations, and possibly to the Spanish colonizers before them. The Ica stones are volcanic andesite rocks of varying sizes, covered in detailed engravings depicting what appear to be surgical operations, maps, exotic animals, telescopes, and in some cases what look unmistakably like humans interacting with dinosaurs. The stones are deeply controversial. Local craftsmen have admitted to producing engraved stones for sale, and the line between genuine pre-Columbian artifacts and modern reproductions is genuinely difficult to establish. Yet some stones appear in 16th century Spanish records, and some have been found in sealed archaeological contexts. Like so many things in this wandering catalogue of mystery, they resist final judgment and reward an open kind of curiosity rather than a closed one. All of these faces and figures, lizard-eyed and bronze-staring, magnetically sleeping and cave-carved and clay-pressed, are looking at something. We do not always know what. But they were made to be looked at, and here we are, thousands of years later, still looking back. Let that mutual gaze hold you gently. You are part of a very long conversation. One of the quiet assumptions we tend to make about the ancient world is that it was local, that people lived and died within a small radius of where they were born, that cultures developed in relative isolation, that the great interconnectedness of the modern world is something new, something we invented with our ships and our roads and our communication networks. It is a reasonable assumption. It is also, the evidence increasingly suggests, not entirely true. Across the vast geography of Eurasia, from Finland in the west to Mongolia and beyond in the east, archaeologists have traced a cultural phenomenon that seems to belong to no single place and no single people, and yet appears with remarkable consistency across thousands of miles of steppe and forest. The Cimatabbino phenomenon is the name given to a set of bronze and copper artifacts, primarily weapons and tools, that appeared across this enormous range between roughly 2100 and 1900 before the Common Era, a span of perhaps 200 years. The objects include distinctive socketed spears, celts, knives with figured handles, and other items cast using a lost wax technique of considerable sophistication. What makes them so remarkable is not just their geographic spread, but their consistency. The same designs, the same casting methods, the same artistic conventions, appearing in burial sites from Scandinavia to China within what appears to be a very short window of time. There was no empire connecting these places. There was no single political or administrative structure that could have coordinated the spread of this tradition. And yet it spread, carried perhaps by small, highly mobile groups moving with extraordinary speed across the Eurasian landmass, traders or metalworkers or both, threading a network of connection across a world that we had assumed was disconnected. The Cimento phenomenon is one of archaeology's most compelling demonstrations that the ancient world was more woven together than we once imagined. And then there are the Dropa stones. Of all the objects in this long, strange catalogue of things that do not quite fit, the Dropa stones are perhaps the most difficult to assess, because the evidence for their existence is itself contested in ways that make careful analysis genuinely challenging. The story as it is usually told begins in 1938, with a Chinese archaeological expedition to the Bayan Kara Ula mountain range on the border of China and Tibet, which allegedly discovered a series of caves containing stone discs, roughly 30 centimeters in diameter, each with a central hole and a spiral groove running outward from the center, and within that groove, a series of tiny hieroglyphic characters that were eventually, according to the account, decoded by a professor named Samum Nui to tell a story of an ancient extraterrestrial people called the Dropa, who had crash-landed in the region 12,000 years ago. The story spread widely and became one of the foundational texts of what came to be known as the ancient astronaut tradition. The problem is that the original discs, the physical objects themselves, cannot be reliably located or verified. No confirmed museum holds them. No peer-reviewed study of them exists in the scientific literature. What does exist is the story and the persistent claim of their existence, and a handful of photographs of uncertain provenance. Whether the Dropa stones are a genuine and suppressed discovery, an elaborate fiction, or something in between, they represent something real about the human relationship with mystery, the hunger for a story that is larger than the ordinary, the hope that somewhere out there is evidence that we have never been entirely alone. That feeling, at least, is entirely genuine. The ancient world was vast. It was connected in ways we are only beginning to trace, and its full map has not yet been drawn. Let that vastness settle around you now, wide and soft and peaceful as a night sky. There is something about going underground that changes the quality of thought. The sounds of the surface world drop away. Time moves differently in the dark and the cool and the silence. The mind slows down and opens up, and things that seem urgent in the bright world above begin to feel less so. The people of the ancient world understood this. They went underground for ritual, for safety, for mystery. And in some cases, they went underground and built something so extraordinary that we are still standing in it thousands of years later, struggling to comprehend the scale of what was done. In the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, carved into the soft volcanic tufa rock of the landscape, there is a city that goes down. Not a cave, exactly, and not merely a cellar or a tunnel. A city, Derinkuyu, whose name means deep well in Turkish, descends through at least 18 levels to a depth of approximately 60 meters below the surface. It is estimated to have been capable of housing up to 20,000 people, along with their livestock, their food stores, their wine and oil presses, their schools, their churches, and their dead. The ventilation shafts that kept the air breathable throughout this vast subterranean complex are an engineering achievement that specialists who study ancient construction speak of with genuine admiration. Massive stone doors, circular and heavy, could be rolled into position from the inside to seal off individual levels against invasion, each one operable only from within. The city was not merely a hiding place. It was a functioning, designed, intentional world beneath the world, built to support life indefinitely in conditions of perfect concealment. The earliest construction has been dated to at least the 8th century before the Common Era, though some researchers believe certain portions may be significantly older. Derinkuyu is connected by tunnels to other underground cities in the region, forming a network of subterranean habitation that spans dozens of kilometers. Who built it first, and exactly when, and how long it took, and how many generations of hands worked to carve it, are questions the rock has not yet yielded. On the other side of the world, in the Zhejiang province of eastern China, a series of large hand-carved caverns were discovered in 1992 entirely by accident, when a local official decided to drain a small pond that had sat for generations at the foot of a cliff near the town of Sheyan. Beneath the water, the mouth of a cave was revealed. And beyond the cave mouth, one of the most astonishing archaeological spaces in China opened up. The Longyu Caves are a series of at least 24 large interconnected caverns, each one vast enough to contain a large building, with ceilings up to 30 meters high and surfaces covered from floor to ceiling in a regular pattern of parallel chisel marks, left in clean, precise lines by the tools of whoever carved this space from solid rock. The caves show no signs of soot, which means no torches were used to light the work. They show no significant amounts of the excavated material nearby, which means the rock that once filled these spaces was removed and taken somewhere, but to where and by whom is unknown. No tools have been found inside them. No records of their construction appear in any Chinese historical document. They are estimated, based on the style of the chisel marks and the geological condition of the rock, to be at least 2,000 years old, possibly considerably older. Local people had no knowledge of them before the drainage of the pond. They were simply there, waiting in the dark and the water for someone to find them. There is a quality that both of these places share, beyond their extraordinary scale and their secrets. It is a quality of deliberateness. These spaces were made with purpose, with sustained effort, with a commitment to craft and precision that speaks to a guiding intention, a knowledge of what was being built and why. The people who carved Durinkyu and the people who hollowed out the Longyu Caves knew what they were doing. They had reasons we no longer have access to, plans we cannot reconstruct. A vision of what these spaces were for that died with them, or was encoded in records that have not yet surfaced. And so they remain as they have always been, patient and cool and dark, full of the particular silence of places that have waited a very long time. Let that silence come to you now. Let the surface world recede a little, gently, like the water draining from the mouth of a cave. What is underneath is quiet and safe and very, very old. There is a certain kind of human achievement that does not announce itself quietly. It does not sit in a museum drawer or wait in a university archive. It stands in the open air, enormous and undeniable, under the same sky it has faced for thousands of years, and it simply refuses to be explained away. These are the places that stop conversation. The places where the mind goes very still and something older than thought takes over, something that recognizes scale and permanence and the particular quality of effort that borders on the sacred. We have, as a species, moved some extraordinary amounts of stone. In the mountains of Romania, in the ancient heartland of the Dacian civilization, a series of megalithic structures and sacred sites cluster around the region of Samosejitusa, the spiritual and political capital of the Dacian kingdom in the centuries surrounding the Common Era. The Samosejitusa megaliths, which include circular sanctuaries built from precisely shaped andesite and limestone blocks, arranged in patterns that align with solar and lunar events, represent a tradition of sacred architecture that drew on astronomical knowledge accumulated over generations. The Dacians were sophisticated builders, sophisticated astronomers, and sophisticated thinkers, and yet their megalithic legacy remains less studied and less celebrated than comparable traditions elsewhere in Europe. The site was systematically destroyed by the Roman Emperor Trajan following his conquest of Dacia in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and much of what was built there is gone. What remains carries the particular weight of things that survived deliberate erasure. From the mountains of Romania to the highlands of West Java in Indonesia, where a hill called Gunung Podong has been attracting attention for decades and controversy for nearly as long. At its surface, Gunung Podong appears to be an ancient megalithic site, a series of terraced platforms covered in large basalt columns, long known to local people as a sacred place and dated by conventional archaeology to roughly 500 to 1500 before the Common Era. But in recent years, a team of researchers, including geologist Danny Natawajoja, has been investigating what lies beneath the surface, using ground-penetrating radar, core drilling, and other subsurface scanning methods, and what they claim to have found is extraordinary. Beneath the known megalithic surface, they argue, lie multiple additional layers of construction, each older than the last, with the deepest structures potentially dating to 20,000 years before the present or earlier, which would make Gunung Podong not merely an ancient site, but possibly the oldest known large-scale construction project in human history. The findings have been vigorously disputed by other geologists and archaeologists, who attribute the subsurface structures to natural volcanic formation rather than human construction. The debate is ongoing, the excavations continue, and the hill keeps its own council. Across the Pacific in the Andes of Peru, the fortress complex of Sacsayhuaman stands above the city of Cusco at an altitude of over 3,700 meters, built from stones so large that the largest of them weighs an estimated 125 tons, and fitted together with a precision so extraordinary that a piece of paper cannot be slid between them. No mortar was used. The blocks are not uniform. They are irregular polygons with multiple faces and angles, and yet they lock together in 3 dimensions with an exactness that modern stonemasons who have studied the walls describe as humbling. The Inca, who completed and occupied the site, attributed its original construction to a people called the Viracocha, who they described as a race that preceded them and whose capabilities exceeded their own. Whether the Inca built it, inherited it, or expanded an already existing structure is a question that archaeologists continue to approach carefully and honestly. What is not in question is the wall itself. It is there. It fits. And no one alive knows exactly how. Not far away in terms of the questions it raises, though separated by geography, the ruins at Pumapunku on the Bolivian Altiplano, near the ancient site of Tiwanaku, present a set of stone blocks that have generated more discussion per square meter than almost any site on Earth. The Pumapunku H-blocks are large, precisely machined stones, some of them weighing over 100 tons, that appear to have been cut and drilled with a regularity that suggests the use of templates and fixed tools. The surfaces are flat to tolerances that are difficult to achieve without precision instruments. The drill holes are clean and uniform. The andesite and red sandstone from which the blocks were made are among the hardest stones in the region. The site appears to have been violently disrupted at some point in its history, the blocks scattered and overturned as if by an enormous force, which has led to speculation about catastrophic flooding or seismic events. Tiwanaku as a culture is dated to roughly 500 to 1000 of the Common Era, but some researchers have argued that the precision of the Pumapunku stonework points to a tradition of craftsmanship either older or more sophisticated than the accepted timeline accommodates. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, at a site of ancient worship that has drawn pilgrims and conquerors and builders for thousands of years, 3 stones sit in a row that are among the heaviest objects ever deliberately placed by human hands. The Baalbek trilithon, incorporated into the foundation of a Roman temple complex built in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, consists of 3 limestone blocks, each measuring roughly 19 meters in length and weighing an estimated 800 tons apiece. A 4th stone, still partially embedded in a nearby quarry, and known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons and would be the largest known worked stone in the world if ever fully separated from the bedrock. How blocks of this size were quarried, transported, and placed with the precision that is evident in the structure has never been definitively explained. The Romans built extraordinarily well, but even Roman engineers, some of whom wrote extensively about their methods, did not describe moving objects of this scale. The question of who placed the trilithon stones, and when, and how, is one of the grandest open questions in the archaeology of the ancient world. And then, in the unlikely setting of a coral rock garden in Homestead, Florida, there is a monument built by a single man that belongs in this company, not because of its antiquity, but because of its mystery. Edward Leedskalnin, a slight Latvian immigrant who stood 5 feet tall and weighed barely 100 pounds, spent 28 years between 1923 and 1951 quarrying, shaping, and moving over 1,000 tons of coral rock, working entirely alone, always at night, never allowing anyone to observe his methods. The result, known as Coral Castle, includes a 9-ton gate so perfectly balanced that it can be opened with a single finger, towers and walls and furniture and astronomical instruments all carved from solid coral, and engineering solutions that have confounded every investigator who has attempted to reconstruct his methods. When asked how he moved such enormous stones alone, Leedskalnin would only say that he had learned the secrets of the pyramid builders. He died in 1951 taking those secrets entirely with him. The castle still stands, perfectly balanced, open to visitors, quietly astonishing. Stone carries time differently than other materials. It does not decay or fade or crumble easily. It holds the mark of the hand that shaped it for millennia, and in that holding it keeps something of the person who worked it, the intention, the effort, the vision of what this heavy and beautiful thing was for. Every stone we have visited tonight was once a mountain, and every mountain was once part of a world that is no longer here. And yet the stone remains, and the mark remains, and something of the person remains with it. Let that weight hold you gently. Let it anchor you, just softly, to the long line of human hands. There is a valley in the Shaanxi province of China where the earth kept a secret for over 2,000 years. Farmers working their fields in 1974 struck terracotta with their tools and found beneath them the outriders of one of the most staggering acts of human devotion ever uncovered. The terracotta army of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, consists of more than 8,000 individually crafted soldiers, each with a distinct face, distinct armor, distinct expression, arranged in military formation in a series of sealed pits as a guardian force for the emperor's afterlife. There are archers and infantry and cavalry, chariots with horses, generals and foot soldiers, all of them life-size, all of them painted in their original colors when they were sealed, the colors fading only on exposure to air after their discovery. They were made between approximately 246 and 206 before the Common Era by a workforce estimated in the hundreds of thousands. And the emperor's actual tomb, an enormous mound rising nearby, has never been excavated. Ancient texts describe its interior as a vast model of the empire, with rivers of liquid mercury flowing by mechanical means, and a ceiling studded with pearls to represent the stars. Modern surveys using remote sensing technology have detected what appears to be a significant chamber within the mound, with anomalous mercury concentrations in the surrounding soil. The interior of the tomb of the first emperor of China remains sealed and unseen, holding whatever it holds, exactly as it was left more than 2,000 years ago. The terracotta army is, in some ways, the perfect note on which to pause and reflect on everything we have encountered tonight. Because what Qin Shi Huang built was not just a monument to power or a display of imperial ambition, though it was certainly both of those things. It was an attempt to carry something forward, to make something that would endure beyond the life of the person who made it. To say, I was here, and I had this, and I made this, and I wanted it to last. Every undeciphered tablet, every ancient map, every impossible object, every carved face and underground city and fitted stone wall we have visited tonight was the work of someone who wanted, in some way, to last. They used whatever was available to them, clay and bronze and gold and living rock, and they pressed into those materials something of themselves, and it has endured. They lasted. And tonight, in the quiet and the dark, you have been their audience. You have listened to what they left behind. The clay tablets are still unread. The great stones are still unexplained. The underground cities are still cool and deep and full of silence. But none of it was made in vain. It was made to reach you, across whatever distance of years and miles was necessary, and tonight it did. The mysteries remain. The world remains. And you, who have listened so patiently to the long, soft story of what we do not yet understand, remain with them. Sleep well. The ancient world keeps its watch. Good night, and have a great, relaxing sleep.